Are you tired of pouring days and weeks into crafting a cue only to realize that getting from your DAW to dollars in hand isn't a quick sprint? I mean, I get it. I've been composing production and library music for over a decade with thousands of cues placed across tons of shows, and I get it. Trust me, I've learned these lessons the hard way. So today, I'm going to break down the entire timeline from that first spark of inspiration all the way to that sweet, spendable royalty income, so you know exactly what to expect. And by the end of today's episode, you're going to understand why patience is just as important as production. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, your weekly insight into the world of production, library, and sync music. Whether you're just starting out or maybe you've got hundreds of placements across all these networks, I promise you, you are absolutely in the right place. And as always, I want to give a heartfelt thanks to the family, friends, and neighbor subscribers of 52 Cues who really do keep all of this going. If you're curious about how you can get more involved with mentoring sessions, community feedback, pitching to the libraries, then be sure to stick around a little bit later in today's episode. Also, later in today's episode, I'm going to be featuring a modern dramedy cue called Look Who's Stalking that I just wrapped up, so you want to stick around for that. But first, today, I want to dig into the big picture timeline of production music and how long it takes cues to work their way through the system from the moment you do think, I've got an idea, all the way to receiving your royalty payment, either by a check or shows up in your bank account. So I want to break down these realistic timeframes and talk about the shortest possible scenarios, the average wait times, and even some of the longer, more glacial timeframes that can often happen in this business. So it all starts with that spark of inspiration. I mean, maybe you've just received a request from a publisher, or perhaps you've come up with a riff while walking at 4 a.m. in the morning or whatever. I mean, this is all the conceptual phase, just an idea floating around in your head. And so that's the first part. But the next part is actually producing it, which is bringing it to life. And for many of us here at 52 Cues, we aim to try to get that done in about a week. I mean, this is ideal, and this is what 52 Cues is entirely predicated on. But I mean, if you're new to a genre, or you're still sharpening your skills, or maybe you're just not feeling the creative mojo that week, it could take longer. And so let's say that from an idea from a cue to having it actually finished being produced could take maybe up to a month. And so again, during this phase, you're not just composing, you're doing your reference work, you're checking out similar tracks, understanding the production requirements, maybe diving into your DAW for recording, doing all the MIDI programming, arranging, and that's not even talking about mixing and mastering. And so once the cue's done, you still might have some revisions. These could be tweaks that you notice yourself listening to it in the car, maybe on that 4 a.m. walk, or maybe you are pitching this to a publisher and you get notes from them. And so you might have several rounds of revisions, but after everything's approved, you still have to prep your deliverables. I'm talking about stems, alt mixes, cut downs, metadata, and then you send it off. So the minimum time that we're looking for here, about a week, if like everything's cooking at top speed. I would say that the average time is probably 2 weeks for one cue, maybe longer. It could take up to a month, maybe even longer than that, if you're like starting to hit some creative roadblocks. For us, from idea to a cue to I have cues ready to give to somebody, we're looking at anywhere between 1 week to a month. But let's say that we are good. And the publisher finds the cue. And we're assuming, of course, that we have somewhere to send it to. We're not even talking about the pitch process. This is just from I have an idea to a cue to finding a library. I mean, that could add a whole 3 to 6 months to this process. But let's just say that you have a relationship with a library or somebody decides to take it. Okay, so you've delivered your files. Well, now the publisher has to do their thing. They accept the cue, they ingest it into their catalog, they handle all the metadata, they sort out album artwork, and your cue might be on an album by itself. It might be on a playlist. It could be a whole album that you're delivering. So they could be waiting on other composers or other parts of the process to kind of all fall into place before they actually deliver the cues up to the actual catalog. And then there's the business of registering with performing rights organizations or your PROs, locking down copyrights, doing paperwork, setting release schedules, all of this. I mean, so realistically, the library ingestion process could take anywhere from 1 to 3 months. Minimum time, 1 month if the library is really moving fast, your timing is right, and there's no kind of back and forth. Average time, probably about 2 months, but it could take up to 3 months for that entire process to work its way through the system to where your album is now in the hands of the library and it shows up. So after the cue or the album is officially published and sitting pretty in the library, your cue is now part of their catalog, whether it's an album or an individual cue, along with a lot of other cues. Then the library is going to pitch it out to their clients. Could be music supervisors, editors, production teams. It also might get distributed to streaming services for exposure, so like Spotify, Apple Music, that kind of thing. And now it's a waiting game. As shows and projects come through, music supervisors sort through these catalogs, searching by keywords, moods, genres, instrumentation. I mean, there's no guarantee here, folks. Some cues land quickly. Others might just sit quietly in the back of the catalog for months or even years. I mean, I've had cues that I wrote in 2015 that didn't make air for 5 years. You just never know. And so the minimum time here, I think we're talking maybe just a month if your cue is perfect for a soon to be released show, maybe sooner. With my sports stuff, sometimes those things can happen really, really quickly. I think a few months ago, we featured iVision, or what was it called? iRobot, that I wrote also in collaboration with Jeff LaPlante. Me and him are firing on all cylinders here lately. And that cue got turned around within about a week, I think, and made air 2 weeks later. So that was 3 weeks. But that's absolutely the exception. That was a very, very specific brief with a very narrow window with a high chance of success. So again, going back. For publication and showing up on a radar and getting pitched, we could be looking at just 1 month, again, if your cue is perfect, but the average time around 3 months for your track to start kind of making the rounds. Maximum time, man, it could be 6 months or longer while it just sits in the catalog. Again, nearly 5 years for a cue called Don't Piss Me Off. Finally showed up. I have no idea what alchemy happened that had a publisher or an editor type in certain keywords and then bam, that shows up. Or it might have been faster than furious. Anyway, let's talk about the next section. Your cue gets selected and placed. That could be anywhere from between 1 to 6 months, because this is the moment. This is what we've been working towards. The music supervisor or editor picks your tracks, sends it up the pipe, and then they cut it into the TV show or trailer or commercial or whatever the project is. But once that episode or project gets completed, then it gets delivered to the network or the platform or whatever. Because eventually, you might see your name scroll by in the credits, probably not, or you might get a notification from your publisher that it actually got placed. But often often not. Most of the time your cue just pops up in the episode and you see it like on a cue sheet. Now, this can happen relatively quickly if the production was already in progress or wrapping up, or they had a very, very clearly defined need for something that you are able to provide. But it could also take months if you were working on a show that's still in development. I just this morning received a notification from a 52 Cues community member who pitched music or wrote music for a brief from last summer, and they got air just this week. So minimum time here, about a month, maybe faster if you're catching a fast-moving production or the production company has very, very clear needs. Your average time, maybe around 3 months, for your track to see some daylight, but it could also take up to 6 months or more, especially if the show's air date is way far out for your cue to get selected and actually shows up. But let's say that your cue does get used. It gets picked up, it shows up either live or it shows up in a production schedule. And then the next step is the cue sheets. Because after the show airs, the production company fills out a cue sheet with the PROs. And this cue sheet details the who, what, when, where, how long, how it was used. Lots of information here. Your name, your PRO affiliation, your IPI number, which is your unique composer ID. Think of it, well, for US folks, it's kind of like your composer social security number. And regardless of if you move PROs, that IPI number goes with you. There's also the publishing details that show up on the cue sheets, which includes splits and usage type, whether it was background, whether it was featured, whether it was theme, how long was the placement. I mean, it can take a long time for production companies to get all that data together, especially knowing how kind of amazingly manual this process is. And what I mean by that is it's people just like you and me, just normies, filling out spreadsheets, maybe even writing things down by hand, because your cue is just one of dozens, maybe hundreds of tracks that are being used. Like, for example, an hour-long episode of a reality TV show could use up to 80 to 100 different cues. And so this step, getting the cue sheets from the production companies, can easily take up to 6 months, maybe 1 month, if everything's efficient and, the production company is ready to go. But for live sports, that takes a really long time because it's all happening very manually, like somebody just writing things down. There's no system that just listens to the music and generates cue sheets. It's very manual. And with live broadcasting, there's a lot of kind of flying by the seat of your pants. Yeah, I think that happens more than we're probably comfortable with. So it could take as little as a month, average time around 3 months, but 6 months or longer. Which brings us to the final step. The PROs mail you some money. Because finally, the PROs are going to gather all the cue sheets, tally up all the royalties based on usage type, placement length, the show's performance, like how many viewers tuned in, how many eyeballs were on the thing that your music showed up in. And then they will schedule your royalty payment. And this is where the rubber really meets the road. A check in the mail or a direct deposit, this is what we're going for. This is it. But PRO payments, which typically run on quarterly cycles, that means that that's an additional 3 to 6 months after the cue sheet's submitted before you finally see that sweet, sweet cheddar. Can I get away with saying that? I don't think so. So minimum time here is 3 months, and that's assuming that your cues, registration and cue sheets showed up perfectly aligned with the PRO's payment schedule. Average time, about 4 months. Maximum, we're looking at 6 months or longer. So let's start putting the math together here. I'd say that the shortest possible scenario, this is every single step going your way, minimal delays, perfect timing with the PROs, payouts, all of that. You might produce the cue in 1 week, get it published in 1 month, have it pitched and placed in 2 months, 1 month to pitch, 1 month to get placed, cue sheets turned in around a month, payments from your PRO about 3 months. So roughly speaking, the best case scenario is somewhere around 7 to 9 months from the very first spark of an idea to cash in hand. Okay. And that's my sports stuff, with the understanding that some of these timelines are movable, but I don't think I've ever gotten paid any sooner than 9 months. This is back in royalties, of course. Okay, so what about your average expectation? Well, let's just say 2 weeks to produce on average. Another 2 months for the library to ingest it and release it. Another 3 months to get pitched around and or discovered. Another 3 months for placements, and another 3 months to show up in the cue sheets. Add on another 4 months to get paid by your PRO, and you are easily looking at a year, maybe even a year and a half on average. And if we want to go worst case scenario on all these steps, I mean, it could stretch out to over 2 years before you ever see royalties from a single cue. 2 years. And I don't think that's unheard of in the library music industry. And this is assuming that no mistakes are made. You know what I mean? Because these are humans doing the best they can with the information they have, right? It's not like anybody is holding back your money and sitting on a big pile making, and none of that is happening. This is assuming that everybody is doing their jobs in the best time and in the best way that they can. Now, I know it can feel like a marathon, and that's because it is. Production music is long tail income. I mean, you're planting seeds that might not bear fruit for a year or two. This is why volume and consistency and patience are your absolute best friends here. So keep writing, keep pitching, but keep the faith, because once the pipeline's full and placements start stacking up, you're getting royalty payments every quarter, sometimes from cues that you barely remember writing. And that upward slope, those first couple of years while the snowball is gaining momentum, you're going to have to push through that because it can absolutely take a while. So if you've ever wondered why your statement feels so delayed or why you can't just get overnight royalties, it's simply how the system works. And understanding this timeline helps manage expectations and encourages you to focus on what you can control, which is making great cues, forging good relationships with your publishers, and above all else, staying positive and trust the process. So what do you think? Have you ever experienced any of these kind of timelines, or maybe even longer? Man, I would love to hear about it. So please drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I do read all of the comments, and I would love to hear from you. So we are going to take a quick break, and we're going to hear from an alternate version of me, tell you about how you can join the community. But you do want to stick around, because when we return, we're going to be checking out Look Who's Stalking, which is my latest modern comedy cue. We'll be right back. Every week I talk about how this episode and the podcast and the community, the channel, would not be possible without the amazing support of our family, friends, and neighbors, subscribers of 52 Cues, who do pay their actual real-life money to keep all of this going. And in addition to being thriving members of the community, as well as supporting me and Shannon and everything that we're doing here, they also receive extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, hundreds and hundreds of hours of video archives, weekly cue breakdowns, production music almanac, living ebook, and the opportunities to submit to real music libraries. Now, it's free to join 52Qs. You can just go to 52qs.com and sign up, be a member of the community. We would love to have you. It will always be free to join the community. But if you've been watching, or if maybe this is your first time, but if you're wondering, is there a way to kind of level up my production music skills in the industry, meeting like-minded, super friendly, very generous composers, then why don't you think about subscribing? Memberships start at around $4 a month, and we would love to have you. Again, that's 52qs.com. So that was Look Who's Stalking, which is a modern comedy cue complete with some guitar and some harmonica. For you family and friends subscribers, you can check out a complete cue breakdown over in the cue breakdown section, and that should come out tomorrow, I believe. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found today's episode helpful, and if you did, then yes, go ahead and subscribe and drop a comment below. Maybe tell me about where you are in your journey. If you have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to let me know. And you definitely don't want to miss next week's episode, where I'm going to be talking about the 3 keys that I think are to a successful cue and having a long-term sustainable career in the production music industry. So you definitely want to stick around for that. But until then, keep writing, keep learning, and trust and know and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next week, peace. The 52 Qs podcast is copyright 2024 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community or becoming a member subscriber of 52 Qs, head over to 52qs.com.